Good afternoon, and thanks for joining our session on personalization at scale, how advisors can efficiently deliver custom advice through managed accounts. I am joined here by Yaqub Ahmed and Jeff Cullen. I'll let them introduce themselves for a moment, as well as I'll introduce myself, Josh Forstatter. I run partnerships at Vestwell. During the course of the discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about how advisors are establishing managed accounts and using them to really customize how they deliver participant advice and why personalization has become such a hot topic. During the session, we really want to focus these 30 minutes on stuff you guys care about. You spent the time to dial in and we appreciate that. So feel free to just write in questions, or heck, you can't hear me, you have issues with microphones, things like that. Go ahead and just ask away. In terms of this presentation, we'll share it after the meeting with anybody who attends it. With that said, let's get started. Jeff, Koob, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Jeff Cullen. I'm the managing partner of Strategic Retirement Partners, or SRP.
And this is Yaqub Ahmed with Franklin Templeton. And Josh, by the way, thanks so much for the opportunity to join you today, and really excited about our expanded partnership. And by the way, call me Koob. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, so I learned pretty quickly that I needed a nickname. I'll pass back to you.
Thanks very much. So in terms of the agenda, we're just going to focus on 3 topics. Why are advisors paying attention to managed accounts now? They've been around a while. Why now? Second, we're going to talk a little bit about what's propelling managed accounts to increase adoption and really helping them, frankly, transform the retirement workplace landscape. And then third, how do you actually effectively implement and frankly grow your business and monetize it through managed accounts? I'll just lead off with the first point, the why. One of the shocking statistics we always see is that 78% of millennials say that 401k is their only source of retirement income. I've seen this stat too, that even broader than millennials, actually most Americans only have a 401k to save. I'd be curious, Koob, from your perspective, they've been around a long time. Why are 401ks increasingly at the epicenter of folks' investment savings, and what does that mean for managed accounts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just a couple thoughts. I guess first of all, I think we'd be remiss not to just acknowledge that there's been a lot of really good work done and a lot of really good progress. I mean, particularly I look back to post PPA just over the last 15 years or so. We've got more people in plans, they're better diversified, we've got higher savings rates, and we've done that over a fairly short period of time when you really think about the last 15 years. I don't think it's necessarily broken, but there's a lot of things that we could be doing better. And, when we think about it just from an FT perspective, maybe take a step back, we strongly believe that the workplace is becoming the financial epicenter for most U.S. workers. So we completed a survey just recently with Harris Polling, and they surveyed well over 1,000 U.S. workers. And what we heard back directly from these U.S. workers, and I'll just give you a couple stats. One is 75% of respondents indicated that they want their workplace to help with their household financial well-being. And it was like 9 out of 10 wanted the actual tools. They wanted things that they can, help visualize what financial well-being and independence and retirement was all about. So, in the end, I think we all agree that there's this mass underserved market, and there's folks that need access to advice. And if we're being, I guess, a little bit honest with ourselves, I think, the financial services industry, we're interested in individuals and households with wealth, kind of full stop, right? And when I look at the retirement vertical within the broader financial services industry, we carry, I think, a very significant responsibility to serve all U.S. workers, right? And so we just have to find ways to provide more workers access to financial wellness and advice. It's got to be tech enabled. It's got to be personalized. I think we have to do what we're doing here today and moving forward is leveraging, strategic partnerships and collaborating to really deliver it in an efficient way, just drive better outcomes for U.S. workers. It's a lot. There's a lot to do there, but I think we've got some answers to some pretty tough questions, frankly.
Fair comment. And I know advisors have always wanted to help folks, but always one of the challenges, and I'm pointing to Jeff, you're one advisor or a team of advisors. At the end of the day, you only got so much time. How do you think this can help you work with all the different participants well beyond just the C-suite?
Yeah, so we can't talk to everyone, but we need to, right? So I think a lot of this just has to do with the environment that we've come out of and the attitudes of those people that are currently requiring and asking for help. So if you think about the investing environment over the course of the last 12 years or so, the market's really only gone in one direction until the course of the last year. So I think it's a combination of things all adding up. Finally, volatility returned back into the markets. People all of a sudden found themselves with a lot of free time on their hands because of COVID. So they're home either by themselves or with their spouse or with others, and they're looking at their accounts for the first time probably in years, since so many of them were on autopilot for so long. So when you add more engagement with more volatility and with a higher account balance than they had 12 years ago, the last time they experienced volatility, I think it's a recipe for people wanting more help, more questions answered, and just wanting more out of their 401k than what the accumulation vehicles that we've given them to get to this point, which have been fantastic, by the way, in getting us to this point. As Koob said, the 401k is not broken. It's done a fantastic job of, helping Americans get to this point. But now that we're here, I think the why is just that they're looking for something more. And managed accounts has the ability to fill this, this very large gap in what can be personalized and distributed to folks in the form of advice.
Jeff, do you mind if I ask you a question? I mean, you're obviously on the front lines. Are you getting a lot of, I should say, an increased volume of calls from underlying participants and your clients maybe on the wealth management side during this COVID environment?
Yeah, so we have been doing participant education webinars on a quarterly basis for a number of years. And the engagement with that library of content during the course of the last 12 months has blown the doors off any previous engagement that we ever had. And like I said, it's a combination of everything. It's more time to engage and pay attention, the volatility getting people to engage, and also people going through a lot of life changes. So COVID has forced people into a lot of life changes, which forces people to look at their money. A lot of people went from renting to buying a house. A lot of people are just making a lot of changes in their lifestyle that requires them to pay attention to their money. And so it's natural that they're engaging more with it.
Yeah, I was just curious. It's a wake up call. And Josh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there. I'll hand it back to you.
It is a wake up call. And I guess it's an interesting point too, because at the end of the day, a managed account and personalized advice is only as good as the ability to gather data about that lifestyle change, whether, Jeff, as you mentioned, it's, a new spouse, a new house, a new child. I'd be curious, Koob, from your perspective, what are managed account solutions doing today with data to help personalize things that maybe they weren't doing in years past?
Yeah, I think there's just data available to if you have the proper data integrations in place. And I kind of think about, the fact that we have to take a more kind of longitudinal view of participants. It's not really this kind of snapshot in time, right? Where it's an individual, and we have, kind of these single factor solutions with target date funds. No two people are alike. We got to take more of a household view, and I think it's just really pulling in that data in a way that can be meaningful to create holistic solutions. And I think back to when managed accounts first started coming out, they weren't fairly all that dynamic, and now I'm starting to see this kind of using the data that's already available to the point where I think we could use them as QDIAs. Why shouldn't we use them as QDIAs? So I just think there's just a more efficient use of data than probably we've seen in the past.
Yeah, no, it's fair. It's been amazing to see the proliferation. So when we look at some stats, we've seen that 70% of plan participants welcome hearing from advisors. So to Jeff's point, those webinars are incredibly valuable. But at the same time, you look at managed account adoption, and while I could point to the fact that managed account adoption in plans has actually tripled, you could counter to me the fact that that's on the basis of plan count using managed accounts. It's not plan assets using managed accounts, which still is below 10%. I'd be curious, to Koob's point, why are managed accounts now a better place to put money into a QDIA, Jeff, that they weren't before? And how have you seen the cost and technology picture really change over time to make them a little bit more appropriate as a fiduciary?
I'll start with me or Q.
Jeff, if it's all right.
Okay. Yeah. So we've been very accustomed to having glide path conversations for many, many years with clients. And it's interesting that, when you sit in these committee meetings, committees are always a little bit torn on the glide path conversation, because we know there's no such thing as the average employee or the median employee, but yet we're still solving for that imaginary person. And all employers, most employers, depending on their workforces, but the vast majority of them understand that even within their own population, they've got distinct populations, sometimes the haves and the have-nots, if you will, just like we have in broader society. The workplace is a proxy for broader society, and they understand that the glide paths that might make the most sense for one population within their building is not the same as what might be appropriate for another population. And so there's always this kind of mental horse trading that goes on in order to accommodate. And that's just not ideal. And I haven't found a committee yet that likes the conversation, so it's one of those things where I think what has held us back from more adoption in the past is really what I said earlier, is that we've seen so many record keepers come out with these wonderful pieces of technology inside their platforms over the course of the last decade, and almost no one uses it. And the reality is when the market's only going up and people aren't engaging and paying attention, you can come out with all the most wonderful tools in the world. It doesn't mean that adoption is going to be high. And so I feel that all that's really held us back is just really a catalyst to get people to pay attention. And so I feel like the catalyst has been the recent events of the course of the last year. And so it's really up to us to use this catalyst and leverage it into giving them a better solution. So in other words, now that we have their attention, let's get them to use something smarter and better.
Coop, care to comment?
Yeah, honestly, I think there's a lot holding, adoption back. I think it's somewhat of a, probably a multifaceted issue. You've got, going back to the power of public policy, right? We post PPA gave a boon to target date funds, right? And it's been great. They're super simple. They're easy to manage as an investment manager. They're easy to distribute. They're largely cost effective, and they're pretty easy to explain to underlying participants, right? So clearly they've taken off. I think too, going back to just being maybe a little bit more honest about, us as an industry, I think, sometimes it's a little bit of a self-inflicted wound, right? In other words, we can be our own worst enemy in the sense that, you got big target date managers, right, that have huge franchises and margins that they're trying to protect. And I absolutely get that. And again, it's a very effective blunt force instrument. But again, I think we can do better than a single factor approach. And I think particularly as participants are aging and getting closer to retirement, whatever that line is, 45 or 50, their inputs become generally more complex. And then I think, 3 is probably fees, right? We need to drive fees down. It needs to be a cost-effective solution. That's a shared responsibility across managers, advisors, and record keepers and the tech providers. And then I guess just touching maybe quickly on the technology again is, we are seeing kind of that next gen managed account provider and services and more holistic solutions come into market. And just in the same way that we saw disruption and momentum with regulation, I kind of view technology as kind of the same transformative impact. So, in the end, we live in this like world of personalization. It's like, we talked about, when we're doing the prep call about Netflix and why it knowing what you want to watch, and Spotify knowing what you want to listen to. And I mean, somehow Netflix understands that I want to watch Virgin River, and I do not understand why. And it's a great show, by the way, but it keeps showing up. And so they 401ks, we should expect the exact same thing from our retirement planning. So the tools are there. We have to execute on it.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, Vestwell being a tech company, we're always thinking about what's happening in the tech landscape. And to your point, you go to Netflix, it knows you like Virgin River. Sorry to pick on you, Koob. It knows what music you should listen to on Spotify. And frankly, these algorithms can predict what you should have. But then you look at the record keeping kind of ecosystem, and the data is just housed in ways where it's not accessible. And I guess a question for Jeff, as that data becomes more accessible to advisors, what are some things advisors should think about doing with it to help drive their practice and better outcomes for folks?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that has always been the thing that we've desired most. That we know that one of the keys to us to delivering more personalized content to somebody is just having more information about them and the things they care about. And so, getting into a partnership, with a firm like yours that gives us that opportunity is very exciting. We hope that more providers in the space will follow suit in the future. That we feel that it has to, in order to get the best outcomes for participants, it has to be a partnership. It can't be, well, I've got mine and I've got, you've got yours kind of thing. That it takes a village to make sure that people have all the resources that they require to be successful. I think along those lines, that brings us back to something that has held us back so far. And I think ultimately, if we're going to be successful going forward, what the data really gives us the ability to do is to overcome one of the hurdles we've had, which is messaging. And by messaging, I mean, I always say, within the SRP walls, I love to say that I'm allergic to the word retirement. Nobody wants to hear that they're retiring. What everybody wants is financial independence, and they want to be well. They want to have a joyful retirement. These are things that resonate with folks. These are things that people want. I'm allergic to the phrase wealth management. You can tell if you go to our website, we don't even spell it as wealth the traditional way, because we're that allergic to it. So part of it is getting the messaging right and talking about things that people actually care about, like financial independence. And then understanding that that if you're going to talk about it in that context, well, then you better have a more goals-based engine or goals-based approach that speaks to all of the things that encompass financial independence, and not just that imaginary 70-year-old who I've never met and I can't imagine what they look like, that I'm supposed to be saving for. So just relating the message to the audience in a way that resonates. The data will help us do that better. I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, it does. And Jeff, I think to your point, I don't think you're alone either in trying to use that data to power your advisory practice and launch managed accounts. The number we've heard is that over a quarter of advisors are now thinking about incorporating managed accounts in their 2021 offering. And increasingly, they're doing it in really customized ways. As you mentioned, custom messaging, right? Thinking about an advisor managed solution that uses their collective investment trust that's true open architecture and highly customized, and then tailoring it to different marketing campaigns. I'd be curious, stepping Jeff out of your practice and Koob into what you're seeing more broadly across, advisory groups similar to SRP. I'd be curious what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the same. I mean, we're seeing I think we need to decommoditize our business, right? For a variety of reasons. One is to, first of all, be honest, protect what we're doing, and add value. And two, take what we've learned on the wealth management side, the best of what we've learned on the wealth management side, and bring it to these participants and US workers that need it most. There's just, again, going back to this underserved marketplace, a lot of us got into this business because we just know we could help a lot more people through a DC plan or through one plan sponsor than we otherwise could in the traditional wealth management space, right? So I think there's that recognition of more holistic solutions and leveraging that data that you talked about to bring these what I think are, you know, simple solutions at the end of the day that are easy to understand, that are goals based, as Jeff said. They've got to be probability driven, they've got to be personalized, and they've got to be responsive too, because situations do change. And you know, that is just as true for your average US worker as it is for a high net worth individual. They've got unique situations and circumstances, and we have to acknowledge that. And the market, as we know, is super fluid, as Jeff mentioned. So, you know, things change, and we have to be able to change with our clients, with plan participants. So that's where I'm seeing a kind of this tipping point of, you know, we got to bring better solutions to the market. And I see advisors on the front lines that are really sophisticated and forward thinking, like Jeff, that are taking it to the next level and starting to disrupt there. It's pretty exciting.
So Jeff, how do you think about, as a practitioner, actually implementing that, all that messaging, all the investments, and all those QDIA and those different capabilities?
Yeah, so I think it makes all the sense in the world to implement it as QDIA. The specific approach that we are hoping to take in as many instances as possible where record keepers allow, due to the technology constraints that each one of them may or may not have, is to do a dynamic QDIA. So that is the direction that, you know, we're looking to go. And just to be clear, for those that may not have heard that term, that would be where somebody under a certain age would be enrolled in a traditional target date fund. Once they reach a certain age, somewhere, you know, 40 to 45 years old, they would map over into a managed account scenario. So if you think about target date funds, then think about the target date fund universe. Before the age of 40, they're by and large pretty similar glide paths, right? As far as their risk assets to non-risk asset exposure. It's really once you get to age 40 to 45, that glide path to glide path, they start to vary pretty wildly across the industry. So once getting into that, instead of putting them on a predetermined glide path that may or may not be appropriate for them, just locking them into something that is truly personalized to them at that point. And we think that's something that is going to resonate with every employer, because we've already had so many uncomfortable conversations, you know, about the status quo.
No, it's a fair point. But I guess it raises one challenge. If you're going to default folks, how do you have good enough data to actually do it? Koob, I'd be curious how your managed account solution and how managed account solutions in general are able to default people and get the right data without folks necessarily logging in.
Yeah, I mean, there's data already available. I mean, you've got, you know, in some instances, salary, you've got geography, you may have marital status, you know, you've got income, you've got gender. You know, there's enough there to take it from a single factor age-based solution to a more holistic solution on day one, and then find ways, to Jeff's point, in engaging those. So it's got to be action oriented, and find ways to engage, frequent engagements with these participants. And I think you can also be very specific in your targeting on messaging to certain cohorts. Again, maybe older participants, or there's a life event, you know, they're now married, it's a time to engage them and start to think about, you know, shifts in their portfolio. But, you know, on day one, even if we do not engage them, we have data available to us through the payroll file that can be leveraged into these more holistic solutions, and again, take it away from a single factor to a multi-factor portfolio. So, you know, that's without any engagement. And I think, you know, once you find ways to connect with folks, and to Jeff's point, people want to connect more now. People want to talk to people, you know, particularly those that don't have advisors. There's a lot of folks that have access to advice outside of their plan, and you know what, they're probably going to be okay. That's not the majority of this underserved market that actually wants to either talk to someone or engage someone, a tool that can help guide them. So, but again, I would just say that there's data there. There's multiple data points that we can already leverage that we can convert into more holistic portfolios that we are going to be leveraging with our product review, Josh.
Absolutely. And as a tech company, we're definitely trying to find ways to default folks in a smart and efficient way and provide data to advisors like Jeff to run your business and think about how you can make better outcomes. I'm now turning to a couple of questions we have from the audience. We have a question from Frank, but what about the cost? Isn't that the barrier to adoption? What's going on, Jeff and Koob, with the cost? How's it changed in the last 10 years?
So, so I'm sitting here on this call, and yet the, our previous adoption rate was pretty low when it came to managed accounts. And one of the stumbling blocks, not only was the messaging and timing and all the things that we discussed earlier, but was also cost. And we've been really encouraged to see some new entrants into this market so that it's more competitive. So not only are the solutions getting better and stronger, but they're getting more competitive from a price point as well. So completely agree with that point. But Frank, if you do some research on some of the newer options out there, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see that there's some more competitive options out there now.
Thanks, Jeff. And from where I think Koob and I sit, we've certainly looked at the history, and you can go back 10, 15 years where you had managed accounts at 100 basis points or more. Mm-hmm. And recently, some of them have been around the 50, 60 basis points range. I know at least for Vestwell and Franklin, we've tried to price at basically a third of where the competition is, and that's without a proprietary fund requirement. And I think increasingly folks have been thinking about that. Because it's an opportunity to really help your advisors and the folks you're working with get better outcomes. Turn to another question, fiduciary responsibility. You're a plan sponsor. Isn't it a concern to default folks into the managed account if you are a fiduciary and you don't want to get Schlichter knocking on your door?
Okay.
I'll turn to Koob or Jeff around that.
Yeah, so I look at it like this. As an alternative to what? I'm already defaulting them into a target date fund. So do I know that glide path is appropriate for every single one of my employees? Of course I don't. And actually, as a fiduciary, I know with 100% certainty that target date fund is not appropriate for everybody that I'm defaulting into. That I can be sure of. So if I'm already doing that and I have the ability to change it from a one-factor model, which is purely their age, to a multi-factor model, taking into account several things that I know about a person, well, I know that I've already got a better model. So then it's just a matter of can I then do something to drive engagement to even further personalize the portfolio, and is the value being created worth the price that's being paid? And in this particular instance, with the people that are on this call, I can say emphatically that yes, that I can feel very, very good about it as a fiduciary. I can't feel good about all the solutions available in the industry, but I certainly can with these.
Yeah, and it's up to ultimately advisors and the fiduciary to make that decision. Mm-hmm. I know we're coming up on time. I'll just address one last question we have from Colin. Points out that, hey, that 78% figure of folks where 401k is their only source of retirement income or retirement account, isn't that a function of age rather than generational shift? I think all of us would say, yeah, it's absolutely age. Ultimately, as you grow older, to Jeff's point, you get more accounts, it gets more complicated, and you have more need for personalization. Mm-hmm. And so I think hopefully, Colin, we addressed your points during the call, but Colin's question raised another question. Isn't there a generational shift happening with millennials where they're waking up and many of them have used Betterment or Wealthfront or these other advice engines? And so as they get older, why won't they turn more to financial advisors? Why won't they turn more to managed accounts? I'd be curious, Koob or Jeff, if you want to weigh in there, if there's something happening generationally here too.
I mean, Jeff, you're on the front lines. You're probably best to to address this, but I'll just say we know they're more engaged, right? We've seen what's happened in the markets more recently without getting into the details of some of the volatility. And they're probably going to be proven that they need access to professional advice based on some of the results that I'm seeing, right? So, but Jeff, you're on the front lines. Go ahead and speak to that.
Yeah, so I think it's, you could look at it and say, well, historically, that demographic hasn't engaged financial advisors as much as their predecessor generations. And I feel that that is largely just because of the environment that they've been in, so they've been in the accumulation phase where the market is only going up, and they're worried more about student loan debt and other things than actually paying attention to their 401ks and getting ahead in their careers and other things. And I think that this is the inflection point where they're finally starting to pay attention and finally realizing, yeah, I do need advice, that I don't want to do this on my own. And I can tell you that we are getting a tremendous amount of the volume that we're seeing on the participant education is coming from that group that's under 40. We did not used to see that. It used to just be that was the default group, that they're in the QDIA and they don't want to talk to anybody, and they're not as engaged as their predecessor generations. But we're seeing that change be right before our eyes.
And Josh, maybe just one quick add on that is, you don't have to physically talk to, I mean, that's the whole point of managed accounts, right? We're able to deliver advice in a digital format, and a lot of these younger generations want to engage in that way. So whether they want to acknowledge it as financial advice or not, what Jeff is doing is taking his best thinking and our best thinking and being able to deliver that in a super tech-enabled, personalized way by leveraging the tech that you're deploying to the marketplace, right? So they are going to get access to advice, and that's the beauty of what we're doing here is just going to be delivered in a different way. And as they get older, honestly, they're going to, whether they believe it or not, I used to think the same way. You think you have all the answers, but your needs change. They become super complex, and you want to talk to somebody, and there'll come that time where they want to talk to humans as well.
Yeah, and Koob, I think that's a perfect wrap up. I appreciate all the folks that joined on the call, and certainly feel free to reach out to us. We will share contact information should you have follow-up questions to Koob, Jeff, or myself. We'll also provide this presentation as well as a recording. Certainly these are tough questions, but ultimately we think that personalization is increasing in the marketplace. We think that the 401k is going to look more like Netflix in the future. And at least I know, speaking for the three of us on the phone, we think managed accounts are part of that future, and the advisors are going to see an increasing role in personalizing advice and driving better outcomes for participants as much as plan sponsors. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Koob.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Koob.
Hey, Jeff.